Hey guys, it's Miss Chang here. So in this video, I'm going to be looking at solving absolute value equations. But before we get into solving absolute values, let's do some warm-up problems where we're looking at a set builder notation. And we're going to sketch out the graph. And let me use a different color. The graph and the interval notation. So first, let's sketch the graph, because for me, I like to sketch the graph first, so that way I have a visual idea of what exactly is going to be my interval. So I always like to do the graph first. Oops, meant to do that with a pen. So we're going to draw our number line here. And I like to put the infinities at both ends just so I can see, but you don't have to. And then I take a look at what numbers I have. So I have a -3 and a 4. So -3 needs to go on the left side since it's the smallest number. And then 4 on the other side. Now we're going to put in our circle. So the -3 is an inequality without a line. So we're going to need an open circle and a closed circle on the 4 since this says x is less than or equal. So that line needs a closed circle. So then we got to do our shading here. So notice that x says it's between -3 and 4. So if it's between -3 and 4, we need a shade between these two numbers. So looks like we have a bounded interval. And once I've shaded, now I can clearly see my interval notation. So the shaded region is between -3 and 4. So let's write our interval notation. Now, I'm going to write the numbers first, and when I look at that -3, I have an open circle, so I need a parentheses, right? And that closed circle means I need a bracket on the 4. And there we have it, our graph and our interval notation. So, like I've said before, if you have an inequality or a set builder first, draw the graph and then figure out the interval notation. You're going to have an easier time picturing what that interval notation is going to look like. All right, now into the new stuff. So absolute value functions you probably have seen before. Those are the vertical lines. And sometimes you have an x inside, sometimes you have a numbers inside. So what do absolute values do? Well, when you stick in a negative number, let me just use an example here. So let's say you stick in a -3. Well, once you take the absolute value of -3, it becomes positive. So what happens is that negative numbers become positive. When you stick in a positive number into an absolute value, let's say like a +3, you just get back a +3. So basically nothing happens. And then let's also account for zeros. If you plug in a 0 into an absolute value, you get back a 0. And I'll show you why this is the case. So for zeros, nothing happens. Same thing with positives. So the reason why this is the case is that absolute values help us measure the distance from 0. So when it says here, why do absolute values never give negative values? It's because absolute values measure the distance from 0. And because it's measuring distance, distance is never a negative value. Okay, and just to show you guys an example, let me just draw us a quick picture here. So here's my number line. I'm going to put a 0 in here. Just put some numbers down. So that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. So this goes to negative infinity, positive infinity. So in this case, if you have 0, right, and you're taking the absolute value of 0, we've already mentioned it's 0. Well, because the distance from 0 to 0 is 0. You didn't move anywhere. So in this case, it's 0. But if you were doing it from 5, so if you took the absolute value of +5, right, you would need to count how far is 5 away from 0. Well, if you count the number of units or steps you had to take, you're about 5 units away. So that's why the absolute value of 5 is 5. And same thing, if you were to go backwards, let's say to -3, right? If you were to go to -3, the distance from -3 to 0 is 3 units. If you count those markers, it's 3. So that's why the absolute value of -3 is +3. And that's how we look at absolute values. It's the distance from 0, the value measured from the distance from 0. So now let's talk a little bit about solving absolute value equation. So here is an equation. Like I said before, equations basically are two expressions joined together with an equal sign. So we do have an equal sign here. So if we're solving, we need to get x by itself. So I've listed out the steps that you have to take when it comes to solving. So let's take a closer look at that. Move this to the side. So in this case, step 1 says to isolate the absolute value. Isolate means to get it by itself. So first off, here are my absolute values. Let me highlight them. So that is my absolute value. Notice that the absolute value is already by itself. There's nothing outside the absolute value. Like this one here, let me show you down below. Notice how this absolute value is not by itself. It has a 5 outside, so that means you would have to move that 5 over before you can do anything to it. So in this case, I don't have to do anything for step 1 because it's already by itself. Step 2 says to split your equation into 2 equations. One is positive and the other is a negative value. So what this means is we're going to split it into 2. So I like to use 2 lines here to show this. So I'm going to have my first one here as 3x with a positive 12. And the other one's going to be same thing, 3x, but this time it's going to be a negative 12. So let me just explain carefully. When you do the split, notice I no longer have absolute value signs on that 3x. It goes away because I'm accounting that this answer could have been positive, but it also could have been negative because I don't know because I took the absolute value, so it could have been a negative 2. So when you split them up, keep the stuff that's inside the absolute value the same, just drop the absolute value signs. But on the other side of the equal sign, make one value positive and the other value negative. After that, all of the rest of it is just solving like normal, like you're going to have to divide over 3 to get x by itself. So I'm going to have to do that on both sides. So on this side here, 12 divided by 3 is 4. The other side, negative 12 divided by 3 is negative 4. And there we have our answers. So we have 2 answers here. X could be 4 or negative 4. And that's it.